we still should question giving him a dime. First, I'm going to argue from an economic point of view, despite what they say, and despite what our governor says and our mayor says, this is not about jobs. This is not about economic development. And why do I say that? $600 million. We were just talking about this at breakfast. Well, you know, they're saying it's going to create construction jobs, right? Build a stadium. I said, wait a minute. You give me $600 million. We have roads, we have schools. For God's sake, we have bridges. If any city should know about bridges and maintaining bridges, we have, and this is actually nationwide, we have serious infrastructure problems. And Minnesota is no exception. So we can create construction jobs, but instead of building a stadium to nowhere, because by the way, we have a stadium, up until 10 years ago, I would have said K through 12. And an organization called Ready for K, Ready for Kindergarten, was established by former Governor Al Quie and former Mayor Don Frazier. And they got me on the board to do the economic analysis, to look at the importance of early childhood education. Back then, early childhood education I would have thought was kindergarten. I started looking at this literature, and they have longitudinal studies, 40-year studies following children, some who had high-quality early ed and some who didn't. They had a randomized control group, which is, the methodology doesn't get much better. And then the one particular study that's quite famous is the Perry Preschool study. And my colleague, Rob Grunwald, and I, when I was at the Fed, we got a hold of that study, we got a hold of the data, and we asked a very simple question. They invested about $20,000 in today's dollars in these kids for a 2-year program. And they compared it again to kids who didn't get the program. This was in Ypsilanti, Michigan. They followed them for 40 years. We asked the question, what was the return on the investment? The kids who got the program were less likely to need special ed, were less likely to be retained in the 3rd grade, were more likely to be literate, grow up, get a job, start a family, pay taxes, stay off welfare. The crime rate between the two groups goes down 50%. We put dollar values on all those figures, and we backed out the annual rate of interest on that public investment. We've argued there's a zero return in building, from a national perspective, in building stadiums. Zero. So we had to beat zero. I thought we could beat zero. We got an 18% inflation-adjusted return, unheard of.
And given the headlines these days and the votes being cast at the state capitol and in City Hall, I thought it'd be good timing to check in with our friendly neighborhood economist and see what he has to say about the wisdom of public spending on public sports facilities. Ed is most widely known for his strong advocacy for early childhood education, again, as an economist and as a public investment. So I think we'll get a little bit into that topic as well. So, and he unfortunately the other day couldn't testify at the City Hall public hearing that we held, the first and only public hearing that we held on the public subsidies for the stadium, because he was in Los Angeles. Of all places, that city that is supposedly ready to steal the Vikings, unless you read the LA papers and then you find out they're not ready to steal the Vikings at all. But keeping myths alive, some continue to say that, and Art was there testifying and speaking about public sports subsidies?
I was speaking about early childhood ed.
Early childhood ed. Okay. Okay. So we missed him this week in City Hall, but we're very happy to have him here, and I will introduce Art Rolnick.
Thanks. Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm a big fan of Gary's. Although even if I wasn't, if you asked me to speak on this topic, I'd be here. Just if you want to know more about what I've been saying and the work I've been doing on this, if you go to the Minneapolis Fed's website, and it's minneapolisfed.org, and there's a special topics called Economic War Among the States, Economic Bidding War. Much of what I've been writing about on this topic is on that website. Also, a recent debate I had on Minnesota Public Radio with our mayor. That's also available. I'm pretty sure that's still on the NPR website, and you can get an idea there of the issues I raised with the mayor. I believe I did get a chance to testify on this issue at a U.S. Senate hearing that Governor Franken was on. This is an education committee? Senator Franken. I'm sorry, what did I say? Governor, I'm sorry. Senator Franken, excuse me, a slip. Senator Franken had. And that's also on, in fact, that's on Senator Franken's website. And there again, I get into this issue. So I'll give you, first I want to talk about economic development, actually. And I'm going to talk about the wrong way to do economic development, and in particular, public funding of professional sports arenas and stadiums, and why that's the wrong way to do it. And then I'll talk about the right way to do economic development. And it's not going to surprise you, given the introduction Gary gave, that I'm going to argue the right way is to invest in people, invest in what economists call human capital, and in particular, to invest in early childhood education, our youngest, our most vulnerable children, that you won't find a better public investment. And we know we talk about the achievement gap in this country between minority kids and white kids, and it is growing and it is huge, and it is a crisis now, and if we don't do anything, it'll be a crisis down the road. But I'm going to challenge some of you and maybe challenge Gary. We have a policy gap in this country, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to sort of conclude with the policy gap, which I find very frustrating. The policy gap is we have research that's overwhelming that investing in our most vulnerable kids at the very beginning is an enormous public return. We know these interventions work and work. We can close the achievement gap. And why aren't we funding it? It's actually not that expensive. Why isn't research affecting policy? Okay, that's going to be the conclusion. Okay, so the wrong way to do economic development. I'm going to give you a hometown example, so it'll make it clear kind of what the economics is here. And it's not going to be a stadium, but it'll be pretty clear that it's analogous. The hometown example, a number of years ago, many of you may be familiar with Lawson Software. Terrific company. They were in Minneapolis. 500 employees, well paid. They were doing so well, they were going to expand. They were going to double in size. And they were doing some planning around their headquarters in Minneapolis. And they get a call from the mayor of St. Paul. And the mayor of St. Paul says, look guys, you come to St. Paul, and we, the city of St. Paul, will build you an office tower to the tune of $110 million. Now you can understand why then Mayor Norm Coleman wanted Lawson over in St. Paul. They're trying to invigorate downtown St. Paul. You got 500 well-paid employees. You're going to get another 500. Economists will talk about multiplier effects because these employees will spend money around downtown and help those businesses. You could see from the mayor's point of view, this is a good thing to invest in. Get these guys, get their company over to St. Paul. That's jobs. Those are real jobs. Lots of spillover effects. But I'm going to argue that's not economic development. And you might question that because if you go to downtown St. Paul, you'll see the Lawson Tower. And if you're around when it was being built, there's construction workers, putting out their jobs involved. So why am I saying it's not economic development? Why am I saying it's the wrong way to do economic development? Well, imagine back then you're the mayor of Minneapolis. You're Sharon Sales Belton. You just lost 500 jobs. You lost the potential of another 500 jobs. That positive multiplier in St. Paul, that's a negative multiplier in Minneapolis. It's what economists call zero sum. So instead of thinking of yourself as a mayor, think of yourself as the governor. You're the governor of Minnesota. You've just seen $110 million public money go to a private company. How many new jobs in Minnesota? Not one. We moved them from one city to another. Zero sum, a zero return. Now this doesn't, of course, just go on in Minnesota. This goes on nationally. We dubbed it the economic bidding war among the states. And there's lots of businesses that play this game, play one state off against another. So in an essay we wrote many 25, 30 years ago, we said From an economic point of view, this makes no sense. It's difficult, however, to fix this problem at a local level. Look, you're the mayor, you're the governor, major company is getting lured away by another state. Hard for you not to kind of at least come up with something in response. Anyway, so we argued it was bad economic policy. We also argued it's bad from a legal point of view. In fact, we argued it violated our Constitution. Why would we say that? And my co-author was a man by the name of Mel Burstein. He was the general counsel at the bank at the time. And we argued it violated the Commerce Clause. What's the Commerce Clause say? The Commerce Clause is our Constitution. According to the Supreme Court, this is actually known as the Dormant Commerce Clause, said cities and states aren't supposed to be interfering with interstate commerce. This is a form of interference. We actually got a court case in the 5th District. This is Ralph Nader who brought this case. There was a subsidy that went to Chrysler. Daimler Chrysler was pitting Michigan against Ohio, a new factory, bunch of new jobs. Which state wants it, guys? Let's start the bidding. They took them to court. 5th District Court ruled based on the Commerce Clause that indeed it violates the Commerce Clause. It got to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that the lawyers didn't have standing, and it was never heard on its merits. However, fortunately, a man by the name of David Minge, David was a congressman here in Minnesota, came by one day and got very interested in this work, and he got a bill written and introduced in Congress to end the economic bidding war. And how would we do this? By the way, let me just back up a little bit. Who's the best at playing the economic bidding war? By far, professional sports teams. I think the number is 80 to 90% of the arenas and stadiums that have been built by cities and built by these teams were paid for by cities and states with public money. They are great at, and they're, as you know, as the Timberwolves, as Twins, and now the Vikings, they put our local politicians in a very difficult position. National perspective, zero return, hard at a local level. So we argued you got to take this at a national level if you really want to stop it forever. Now, how would you do that? How would you stop this economic bidding war? How would you prevent the Vikings from kind of it's a form of economic blackmail, and recognize it as economic blackmail? Because one payment doesn't do it. You may pay them off now and build that stadium, but watch out 5 years from now or 10 years from now. New York Times reporter years ago called me up and said, what do you do about the double dippers? Because in New York, what was happening is they paid off a bunch of companies to stay in New York and not go in New Jersey. 5 years later, they're back. What are you going to do for us today? So how do you end this bidding war? We had a very simple idea that Minge put into his bill. Under this bill, if you're a private business getting preferential treatment, and I want to stress preferential, so we're not talking about something that's available to everybody. We're not talking about equal treatment. We're talking about special treatment for a private business. Under our bill, if you got a subsidy of any form, a stadium, an office tower, outright cash from a government, a sub-government, you'd have to declare it as income. Right now, there's like it's a loophole in the tax laws. You're a private company, Lawson Software, you get a $110 million office tower, you don't have to declare it as income. Under our bill, you would. And then we'd have the federal government tax all these subsidies at 100%. Bidding war is over. It's over as soon as that bill is passed. You do not need any sort of bureaucratic infrastructure. It would be self-regulating. Vikings, you wouldn't be inviting me here. If that bill had passed in 1999, you wouldn't be inviting me here because that bidding war is over. The Vikings, if they came to us for whatever it is, my guess is $1 billion by the time they're done, they wouldn't bother because whatever they get from the county, the city, the state, they'd have to give back to the federal government. So now the Vikings would have to make their decision on the market, which is what we want them to do. They're a private company, for God's sake. Let them make the decision on where the customers are. They wouldn't be leaving here. This is a great market. Vikings don't want to open up their books for good reason. They're making a lot of money in this market, which says odds are it's a bluff that they're leaving. Okay. Economic bidding war, the wrong way to do it. By the way, that bill Paul Wellstone wanted to introduce that bill in the Senate. Mingy didn't want him to do that because he didn't want it to be a Minnesota bill. So he was courting John McCain. So it was going to be Republican, Democrat. And while this was going on, it was introduced in the House. All of a sudden, it died. It didn't go anywhere. Why not? The sports lobbyists just killed it. They had a lot of money and a lot of funding to make sure that bill never got a hearing. And you can understand from the NFL, the Major League Baseball, why they would be against the bill. They're making billions of dollars off of taxpayers. I'm sure they're willing to invest millions to get billions, and they did it, and we never got a hearing. Well, I shouldn't say that. 3 years ago, Senator Kucinich had me testify in Congress on the issue, not on the bill. The bill wasn't around anymore. So there are many in Congress who are aware of this problem. It's obviously going to take some leadership to end it. They haven't ended it. So we've got the problem. We've got the Vikings blackmailing us right now, threatening to leave, and we're in a tough position. However, it's time we said no. They're very worried. If Minnesota says no and a number of other states start to say no, that NFL is in trouble. They can't afford to have it. That's why they bring the commissioner here. You know, they did the same thing with the basketball team. Commissioner Stern came here and said, you know, if you don't build this arena for the Timberwolves, you'll never ever get an NBA team here. We had so I knew Carl Pohlad. I knew Carl Pohlad, and I knew he wasn't going to move. So what they did instead, because they didn't have a credible threat to move, because Carl wasn't going anywhere, his family wasn't going to leave Minnesota, they brought in the commissioner and they talked about contraction. They were going to contract the number of teams. So that was their threat. Now again, this was a very profitable market, and that was a bluff, but your governor, whatever, you don't want to take that chance. So, but I'm going to argue that despite some benefits from having the Vikings here, clearly there's, I don't know, 30% of the public are vehement about wanting to pay for that stadium with public dollars, are big fans. When I go to testify against this, there's usually people in paint around, you know, with the Viking horns, and they're pretty intimidating. And they usually have about 10 lobbyists. And as you saw, the football players come in. I can't bring, what can I bring? I tend to wear a tie and a suit to try to compete with these guys, but they clearly have the resources. But why am I going to say we still should question giving them a dime? First, I'm going to argue from an economic point of view, despite what they say, despite what our governor says and our mayor says, this is not about jobs. This is not about economic development. And why do I say that? $600 million. We were just talking about this at breakfast. Well, you know, they're saying it's going to create construction jobs, right? Build a stadium. I said, wait a minute. You give me $600 million. We have roads. We have schools. For God's sake, we have bridges. Anybody, if any city should know about bridges and maintaining bridges, we have, and this is actually nationwide, we have serious infrastructure problems. And Minnesota is no exception. So we can create construction jobs, but instead of building a stadium to nowhere, because by the way, we have a stadium, right? We have a stadium. You want to play? I see that. I drive by that stadium all the time, and it's got a new roof, guys. Okay, so it can't be about jobs. What about the spillover effects? You know, you hear about this quality of life and how, then some of my good buddies, I got two actually very good buddies, are on the Twin Cities United Way board with me. Or were anyways. Doug Baker, from CEO of Ecolab, and Richard Davis, CEO of U.S. Bank. Two of the movers and shakers, and I'm going to tell you, they're really good people. I work with them on United Way. They do amazing things for this community. These guys come out for the stadium. Maybe you saw the article, Laurie Sturdivant's piece in the paper. But I've said to these guys a year ago when they first formed their committee of business guys for the stadium, I said, okay guys, if you think they're that important, how about a surtax on corporate profits to pay for it? Oh, no. You know, so effectively what they want and what they're willing to live with is some sort of sales tax. I'm going to call it a gambling tax. You know, they talk about Racino. Well, that's not really a tax, right? Because that's voluntary. Well, a sales tax is voluntary too. Fact is, Racinos and sales tax are very regressive. What it means will be low-income families, are going to be paying for a stadium that they can't afford to go to. So it's not about economics. If you look at the distribution, it's not like we're helping the poor. That's clearly not the case. It is economic blackmail. And if you want to do it about economic development and promoting a sustainable economy, there's one obvious way to do that. And you should know it in this state. And why do I say that? For two reasons. One, internationally, if you look around the world at the economic miracles since post-World War II, whether it's Japan, South Korea, China, India today, Ireland, their success came from investing in people, from investing in education, from investing in job training. It's the quality of their workforce that matters so much. And I say you should know it in this state. You're living in one of the best economies in this country. That hasn't always been true. If you go back in time, Minnesota in the 1920s was a pretty average economy in terms of per capita income, per capita output, productivity. It was true that up until the 50s, and sometime after the 50s, Minnesota's economy starts to outproduce virtually every state in this country. And that went on for years. What caused it? What turned it around? Well, if you look at the various metrics on different indicators, the obvious one is we started to pour money into education. Today, our women are #1 in high school degrees, and they're in their top 10% in terms of advanced degrees. Overall, we're in the top 10% in terms of our workforce. That's why we have 20 Fortune 500 companies in this state. On a per capita basis, we're #1. We're #1 having these great companies, not because of the Vikings or the Twins or the Timber. That's icing on the cake. It's because of this workforce. You want to talk about quality of life, that's quality of life. So my argument is if investing in stadiums is not the right way to do economic development, it's investing in human capital, and we know that in this state. Actually, I tell Garrison Keillor, we now have data to support your assertion that we're all above average. We are a very, very well-educated economy. So that leads me to a question economists often pose. You got limited dollars, public dollars. What's the best way to invest them in education? Should it be higher ed? Should it be K through 12? Up until 10 years ago, I would have said K through 12. And an organization called Ready for K, Ready for Kindergarten, was established by former Governor Al Quie and former Mayor Don Frazier. And they got me on the board to do the economic analysis, to look at the importance of early childhood education. Back then, early childhood education I would have thought was kindergarten. I started looking at this literature, and they have longitudinal studies, 40-year studies following children, some who had high quality early ed and some who didn't. They had a randomized control group, which is, the methodology doesn't get much better. And then the one particular study that's quite famous is the Perry Preschool study. And my colleague Rob Grunwald and I, when I was at the Fed, we got a hold of that study, we got a hold of the data, and we asked a very simple question. They invested about $20,000 in today's dollars in these kids for a 2-year program. And they compared it again to kids who didn't get the program. This was in Ypsilanti, Michigan. They followed them for 40 years. We asked the question, what was the return on the investment? The kids who got the program were less likely to need special ed, were less likely to be retained in the 3rd grade, were more likely to be literate, grow up, get a job, start a family, pay taxes, stay off welfare. The crime rate between the two groups goes down 50%. We put dollar values on all those figures, and we backed out the annual rate of interest on that public investment. We've argued there's a 0 return in building, from a national perspective, in building stadiums. 0. So we had to beat 0. I thought we could beat 0. We got an 18% inflation-adjusted return. Unheard of. My venture capital buddies, if they saw an 18% return in anything, wouldn't go unfunded for more than a day. So that was the bottom line of a lot of our work, and a lot of my work since, and it's been going on 10 years now, is to say, look, I say this to Minneapolis, I say it to St. Paul, I say it to the state of Minnesota, my co-author and I have been in virtually every state on this issue. In fact, we've been around the world on this issue, arguing that the research is overwhelming. There's another independent set of research, by the way, that you should know about, and that's the neuroscience research on brain development. They show that children living in stressful environments, and stress, I'm talking poverty, by age 3, because of that constant stress, that brain hasn't developed properly by age 3. And that we need to get at these kids prenatal, really. Prenatal to 5 is what I mean by early childhood education. And I've argued there's a simple way to do this. And fortunately, guys like Richard Davis from U.S. Bank and Doug Baker have helped fund the $20 million pilot to show that we could do this in the real world. This isn't just the research. We could take it to the real world, show that our kids can succeed, and then eventually argue to bring it to scale. So we created something called the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation, MELF.us. It's online. You can learn all about MELF. Basically, your top CEOs in this state. We raised $20 million, and we did 2 things. One is called Parent Aware. It's a rating system. As you go around town, you'll see early ed programs, many of them with a banner outside. We're 4-star rated. We have a 4-star rating system, and we have privately funded that. We're bringing that statewide. So everyone will know where the quality programs are. The second thing we did with half of that money is we created a pilot in St. Paul, in Frogtown, and north of St. Paul. The reason we did this in St. Paul first was Mayor Coleman came to us, Chris Coleman came to us, said he got wind that we were thinking of doing a pilot, and he offered up his staff to help us do that, some resources. So anyways, it's in St. Paul. We provide our at-risk families with scholarships. Scholarships not to go to the University of Minnesota or Harvard or University of Wisconsin. Scholarships for 3- and 4-year-old children, our most vulnerable children, to go to high-quality early ed programs. To go to Montessori, to go to Head Start, to go to New Horizons, but they have to be a 3- or 4-star rated program. And these scholarships include money for mentors. These are home visiting nurses that start prenatal. We show if you do that, you reduce infant mortality, you reduce low birth weight. The health metrics are amazing, and this is coming out of the Center for Disease Control. Your health today is highly correlated with those health metrics starting prenatal to 3. So if we start these kids off healthy, if they start school healthy and ready to learn, so they're not far behind, so they're engaged and they have engaged parents, we won't have an achievement gap. You won't find a better public investment, and we know how to do it. Simply scholarships will do it. Because Washington got very interested in what we're doing, I'm proud to say Minnesota last year we got 3 federal grants. We got Race to the Top. President Obama put $500 million into Race to the Top so states with innovative ideas for early ed could compete. We one of the few states, we got a $45 million Race to the Top grant to replicate what we did in St. Paul, in Minneapolis, White Earth, and Itasca. 4 areas that we're going to replicate what we did. And we're going to show, I don't care the community, I don't care the race of the child, it doesn't matter. If you provide a safe and healthy environment, that child will thrive. And we're going to show that anywhere in the state, eventually to take it statewide. $45 million went to the state for Race to the Top. $28 million, I think I got this right, went to NAS, Northside Achievement Zone. That's one of the promised neighborhoods. St. Paul, there's the other promised neighborhoods. They're going to get some of the money from Race to the Top. So we're going to, both our promised neighborhoods are going to have these programs. And then, as I mentioned, White Earth and Itasca. Lastly, I'm at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I run an institute focusing on early childhood education. We got $15 million from the federal government, plus $3 billion from private foundations, including Target and McKnight. So we got an $18 billion package to replicate a program, an early childhood program that's been very successful in Chicago, that is age 3 to grade 3, to make sure then when our kids get into K through 12, K through 3, there are also 4-star programs in K through 3. That's the program. The mission is to bring it to scale here in Minnesota. I've said to the governor and many other players in this town, before you give a dime to the Vikings, at least match what the federal government has given us. It's roughly about $100 million. At least match, at least give us that. The federal government thinks our kids are that important. Surely we do. But the truth be told, what I want to do ultimately, and I'll finish this and then talk about my frustration, the thing ultimately I want to do, and the proposal is out there and we're doing some work on this and we need all the support we can get. We ultimately want to create an endowed fund, about $1.5 billion, roughly the cost of 2 stadiums. And this endowed fund, the interest on the endowed fund in perpetuity would provide scholarships for all our vulnerable kids in the state in perpetuity. That's the ultimate goal. And again, it's $1.5 billion. I get into the details on that, but I just want to conclude and then we can open up for questions. So why aren't we doing this? We got the neuroscience research that says brain development is critical at these years. We know we got a growing achievement gap. We know we have a growing number of poverty kids. That's not just happening next few years, but look out 20 or 30 years. We've got more and more vulnerable kids. We know how to fix the problem. It actually isn't that expensive. This economy produces $280 billion a year in gross state product, so we can afford to do that. Instead, we're talking about another stadium for the Vikings. This proposal, maybe I'll get lucky in a few years, we'll get it on the table, but we should be doing it now. If we wait another 3 to 5 years, how many more kids do we leave behind? How frustrating it is that we have this policy gap. So try to really bring it home to this audience. I'll conclude with one case study, if you will. Southside Family Nurturing Center. Maybe many of you know about this. It's in the Phillips neighborhood. They had me tour it about a year ago. Get a chance, go over there, knock on their door, use my name, say you'd like to look around, get a tour. They serve children that come from family of violence. 2, 3, and 4-year-old kids. They do amazing work. They're probably getting paid minimum wage. I go there, I'm very moved by what they're doing and the effects there. Many of these kids, when they first come in, they're kind of in a shell. They're able to bring them out. They bring in Duke the dog. It's interesting how pets can calm kids down. It's so important to calm them down. So they're an amazing program. Now, I'm the economist, and I'm asking how many kids you're serving, what it's the cost. I want to look at the books, and they kind of show me all the data. And what they say to me, Art, they said, I just want you to know that we're servicing 40 kids now. That's our program. We got room for 40 kids. We used to service 100 kids. I said, really? What happened? I mean, this program is so amazing. How could you not be serving 200 kids? Well, in 2009, keep that date in mind, 2009, Hennepin County, because they were under some budget constraints, zeroed them out. Fortunately, United Way came up with some money so they could keep 40 kids. 2009, that's when Hennepin County voted, 4 men for, 3 women against, by the way. The boys won out, to fund the Target, the new baseball stadium for Carl Pohlad. I asked, how many Hennepin County commissioners visited your program? Only one. Only one, Peter McLaughlin. So I've told the Star Tribune, the next time you write a story about how that stadium improved the quality of life for Minneapolis, I want you to go to visit, not the 40 kids that are in the program, but the 60 kids that are no longer in that program. And tell me what their quality of life is like now that we've built a stadium for Carl Pohlad, who would have built it himself, but we didn't call his bluff. So I'll conclude with that, and thanks for the opportunity to give this talk. Appreciate it. Thanks, man.
We're going to pass off the mic to
That'll
people
work.
who have questions in the audience, and we'll start with Dan Cohen.
All right, now Dan bought me breakfast, so I've got to be nice to him. Go ahead.
Does that entitle me to an answer?
It does. It does.
I guess not. Okay, that would be part of the bargain. First of all, let me comment on the Star and Tribune. You could have papered the walls of any house in the city, with their editorials announcing the expansion of gambling until we got to this point where we're going to finance the stadium with gambling revenues, taking advantage of the poorest people in the state, and suddenly it's a wonderful idea. And of course, they benefit from it because they've got property that will be, whose value will be enhanced if this stadium bill passes. It's really obscene. But let me comment first on what you said about your education program. I think the heart and soul of this is that when you start early to deal with potential problems, you will, in the long run, save money and save lives.
All right, I'm taking them on the road with me.
Okay. But I would like to say this about stadium financing, and I'd like to ask you if you would comment on this. I don't see why this couldn't be done with revenue geo bonds against 30-year leases for the where the state would own the stadium. The revenues would be generated by the lease to the Vikings. You'd get their books, and you'd have a 30-year bonds and sink them out against these leases. And the geo portion would only come in if they fail to meet their lease obligations.
So you're talking about general obligation bonds,
yes, and
bonds.
you've got a state with AAA ratings, and you make this a statewide project instead of trying to have the city go against the rural area and all the rest of this damn political thing. And you'd more or less require some of these larger corporations here to take a large chunk of these bonds. It seems to me to be the way to do it if you want to get it done. So I have one question after that, but I'd like you to comment on this.
So let me, on the Star and Tribune, I want to make one comment. It's not just the land that there's a conflict of interest with the Star Tribune. If we didn't have Major League Sports in this town, I don't think we would have print media in this town. They're pretty much, their sales are doing, most of that paper is about sports.
Right.
And it's very competitive, so I understand their self-interest here. And they're somewhat honest about it. It's just too bad that we used to have a great paper in this town. We used to have great investigative reporting. We don't anymore.
Yeah, I look forward eagerly to the second bankruptcy. But,
yeah. I will say MinPost. Let me put in a plug for MinPost. Joel Kramer is a friend, and I think he's done a great job with that. I think there you've got a better chance at getting some more objective and investigative reporting. On funding it, yeah, general obligation bonds would make sense to me. Again,
Rev general.
Yeah,
Rev geo.
But I just don't think this is what government should be doing. This is basically, private market will work just fine. There is no market failure here. This is the economist talking. I want government to do what the private market will not do. So philosophically, I'm very much against any of these subsidies. This is a private business. Now, it's entertainment. The market, you know, this is a wealthy state. We'll have no trouble attracting lots of entertainment. People say to me, well, you know, if you lose the team, you know, it has this quality of life effect. When we lost the hockey team, the NHL hockey team, it was an interesting experiment. So what happened, that I happened to know at that time, the university people, they told me that the demand for college hockey tickets just skyrocketed. Then the high school people told me families started to go to high school hockey games. So it's not like there are substitutes for this stuff. So it isn't even clear to me. Now, when I was growing up in Detroit, if I want, and I'm a big Detroit Lions fan, every other week we'd get to watch a game on TV because they didn't publicize the home game, didn't televise the home games. Now, today, my kid and anybody can watch virtually any game on TV from any team from anywhere. So, and if you want to go to a game, if you're not here, you know, the wealthy people who go to these games, they can hop on a train or hop on a plane, whatever. So so first, fundamentally, now if you had to fund it, if you're in that corner, if they pushed you in the corner politically so you have to fund it, I would go as transparent as I could. It should be statewide, I agree with you, and that is one way to do it, and I would definitely, well, I would like, see, the NFL wouldn't like this, I would make it as much a user tax as I could. So I would.
That's what a tax against.
That's
revenue
right. That's what a tax against revenue. That's right. The NFL isn't going to go for that. I can tell you that.
All right.
But I agree with you. That form of taxation, if you had to do it, would probably be the best way to do it.
Let me take one other moment of your time. I had my twice weekly dose of Krugman this morning. I need to get some commentary from you on this ongoing dispute between austerity and government spending as the way out of the hole we're in. Obviously, he's a Keynesian, he's a great opponent of austerity, but I don't see that the program from the administration the last 3-4 years has been an austerity program. We're spending 25% of GDP. The government is spending at a level that it hasn't spent at since World War II. We've got $15 trillion worth of debt. We've had stimulus programs. What should we be doing to get us out of this recession?
So this is a little off the topic, but one of my favorite ones, because I used to comment on this all the time as Director of Research at the Federal Reserve. The question is, can the government, by government spending, get us out of recessions, or at least mitigate some of the major problems with recession? I think the evidence is, my view, and that's not U.S., it's world evidence, does not support Paul Krugman's view that government can spend us out of recessions or out of depressions. The Great Depression's a good example where it didn't work. And we really didn't get out of that Great Depression. We didn't. It was a 10-year. We didn't get out of it until FDR gets rid of many of the New Deal programs, allows private sectors to start producing as they see fit. Now, he wanted them to produce a lot of arms and military for World War II, but he pretty much made it laissez-faire, and we got rid of much of those problems. And that's how my interpretation, how he got out of the Great Depression. It wasn't government spending per se. There have been lots of experiments. The Japanese tried this in the 90s because they were in a decade-long recession with a whole lot of government spending. It didn't work there. As economists, we have a hard time finding real-world examples where government has been able to spend their way out of recessions. What we have found is often when they try to do it, they get themselves into fiscal problems long-term that put themselves, makes their debt, the interest they have to pay on their debt much higher, etc. So I disagree with Krugman that these stimulus programs will work. My preference is to focus government programs on the unfortunate ones that are unemployed, because we have a market economy, we're going to have recessions. So we need a safety net in a whole lot of different ways to help those workers who get unemployed get back in the job market, to provide some financial support for them. So I would focus government on the unemployed. Focus. Now, it's not easy to do that in an effective way, but my view of return on investment, my view on the most effective way for government to intervene, if you will, in a private market is to focus on the needy, if you will. And with a stimulus package, if you look at a lot of those dollars and how they were spent, it's not clear we were helping the unemployed. It's not clear there was trickle down in any way, shape, or form with that stimulus package. We helped some bankers out, we helped some big businesses out, we helped General Motors out, and I admit they're doing well today. It's interesting though, and I've said this at the White House, I said, I don't care how much money you give to General Motors and how successful they are, 75% of the children in the Detroit public schools do not graduate high school on time or at all. It's a third world economy now. It'll be a third world economy 20 years from now if you don't fix the educational system. So in the short run, I think what Krugman is saying is questionable, and in the long run, there's no doubt in my mind the way to pull economies like Detroit out of the economic depths that they're in is to educate their kids.
Since there's a lack of questions from the audience, I'm going to go next.
Does he always pull rank around here? And you vote for him, right?
Some of them. We don't have a litmus test for attendance here. It's about the jobs, Art. You know, I've seen the numbers myself. We're going to create 7,500 part-time, full-time jobs through the creation and the construction of the stadium. Therefore, spending up to $1 billion in public dollars is worthwhile to create 7,500 full-time and part-time jobs, right?
You just setting me up. So actually, this relates to the question earlier. Let me ask you, you're going to take $1 billion, let's say it's $1 billion, just keep it simple, and you're going to create all these construction jobs, building a stadium. Where did the $1 billion come from, Gary?
From the restaurant tax that I paid when I bought my meal.
All right, so you're taking money out of the private sector, in this case from a lot of low-income families, it'll end up, but you're taking money out of the economy that would have created jobs. This is one problem with the stimulus package, the notion, well, if the government spends money, it's going to create jobs. But where did it get the money? If it's got to start taxing, it has to get it from the private sector. So it's taking from Peter and giving to Paul. Now, maybe Paul will do a better job than Peter, but that's not clear. So that's one objection I have to we're going to create jobs. If I concede, as I did to the mayor in my debate on NPR, I said to the mayor, all right, you want to create, you give me $1 billion. You know what I can do in early ed? And I pointed out what we did in St. Paul. So we gave these scholarships to these families. They were worth up to $13,000 a year. So one of the first things that happened, go to Rice Street, a little bit north of the Capitol. There's a brand new early ed center that got built there by New Horizon. They never had anything like that in that community before. Now they've got a high-quality early ed program. It's on a bus line, so it's easy for these families to get there. He filled up like that with the scholarship family. He was there because he knew the parents had the economic power to pay for it. That's economic development. That actually changes a community, and those are real jobs. Those are people, they were building, you could see the construction workers out there. So you give me, the question is, what is the best way to invest, what are the best type of jobs, the best investment for the community? Is it a stadium, or is it early ed centers? And they hire teachers, and those teachers also spend money, so you get multiplier effects. And now you've got an early ed center in that community. You watch the kids that were in that center 20 years from now, what they're doing, okay? And you're going to see economic development big time. So you're making a community safer. You're creating jobs. So question is, what kind of jobs, who should we favor here? And so I can create jobs. In fact, I'll bet any of you, if I gave you $1 billion, could create jobs. You could give it to General Mills, they'll create jobs. You can give it to 3M, they'll create jobs. So the question is, who gets that $1 billion? Where's the best investment? Hands down, it's in education. Hands down, it's an early childhood education.
But the unemployment rate among construction workers is 25%. And those construction workers are no longer eligible for unemployment benefits, and now they're at risk for losing their homes because they can't pay their mortgages. So if we subsidize these construction jobs, that's good, right?
So if your concern is over those construction workers, actually what the mayor said, first his concern was over hospitality workers, because we want to become the hospitality city. I said, well, wait a minute. And he said, it's not about the Vikings, because they're only using the new stadium 8 or 10 games. It's all the other things we can bring. I said, wait a second. I'm pretty sure there's still a stadium up there. You can still bring the tractor pulls and all that. And by the way, if you really want to help, if you're really concerned about the hospitality workers, raise the earned income tax credit. That's probably the most direct way you can help those people. And you know, if you give $1 billion to the owners of the Vikings, who knows what happens with the hospitality workers. But if I raise the earned income tax credit, I know I'm helping them. On the construction workers, increase the unemployment, provide more, extend the unemployment insurance coverage another year or two till we start getting out of this very slow economy. That's much cheaper than building that stadium. And if you give them money, they'll spend the money, that'll create jobs, that'll help stimulate the economy, if that's your argument. So you don't have to build a stadium to help the construction workers. Or, if I really want to help the construction workers and invest well, and former Governor Jesse Ventura made this argument very well. When the Twins came to him, he says, wait a second, I got schools that are falling apart, I got bridges that are falling apart, I got roads that need, I can provide construction jobs if that's, and instead of a stadium to nowhere, let's build the infrastructure that we know we need in this state. So even that argument, I think, is misleading.
Okay, next question.
Lisa.
Okay. I understand about, you mentioned regressive taxes, especially the taxes on gambling, and I understand what regressive taxes are, but most people don't, and so I'm always looking for a 30-second elevator speech to explain regressive taxes to people, because every time I hear that they're going to give me a break and tax the people who are gambling to build this stadium.
Okay, first of all, what do we mean by a regressive? There's three terms. There's a proportional, progressive, regressive. The idea when we got when we passed the income tax, that was Woodrow Wilson back in 1914, I think, around the time the Federal Reserve was established. They decided that if we're going to have an income tax, we're going to have the rich pay proportionally more than the poor. What that means is that if you're poor, say, you pay 1% of your income. If you're rich, you're going to pay 2% of your income. So proportional would be everybody pays 1%. And in this country, our values were that the rich should pay proportionally more, and so it was what was known as progressive versus proportional. The other way to look at it is with the poor, they were paying nothing. So that means that it was clearly progressive. Over the years, we've put in enough loopholes in the tax system so it got perverted. So if you look at our tax system now, some have argued it's actually the poor pay proportionally more because of Social Security, because of sales taxes. So we've reversed it. So by regressive, we mean instead of at least everybody paying the same percentage, if the rich, even if the rich aren't paying more, everybody paying the same. Regressive means the poor are paying a percentage-wise more. So it's a question of the percentage of your income. So if you're making $10,000 a year, you're considered living in poverty, and you're paying $1,000 worth of taxes, that's 10%. Some of the rich, if you look at their income, are only paying 5%. They may be poor, more in dollar terms, but only 5% of their income. That's regressive. So I don't know if that was as clear as you want it, and it's not easy to explain, but it means that as a percentage of your income, low-income families are paying more than rich. And that's what the president, if you listen to President Obama on this issue, his big concern is because there's so many loopholes, we have the rich are not paying at least the same percentage as the poor.
And why are the gambling taxes regressive?
Oh, so the gambling taxes, the reason we assert they're regressive, and that takes some research, if you look at on average who's gambling, it's low-income families. And so I call it a tax, and not really a tax, but you know, they take a big cut of that. The government, or the government runs it, whether it's a lottery, and so those proceeds are basically, on average, coming from low-income families, and they're gambling more, so more of that revenue is coming from low-income than from high-income.
But gambling is bad, so isn't
Well, then there are other issues. Lisa was saying then you got some side effects with gambling, and yes, and there are many of us that are concerned. If I had my way, I would have kept gambling in Las Vegas. I think government should set examples for the public and stress the importance of education, express the importance of, you know, a good family life, et cetera, et cetera. My values, I would not have the governments supporting and promoting gambling. I do not like to see these commercials on TV, you know, enticing us to buy more lottery tickets or whatever. That's not the role of government. It's easy for politicians to do that instead of raising taxes. And I think that's, and again, overall, I think it tends to we end up taxing low-income families more than we should because we've gone to that way of taxing, not the way I would do it. Oh, I'm sorry, Gary, it's your, yes.
So I want to ask a psychiatric question. The mayor of Minneapolis is definitely not stupid. We've seen his dance moves in the last couple of weeks as he talked about how this represents no new taxes when it's really, it turns out, $675 million worth of extended taxes. We've talked about, you know, it's not a violation of the referendum and so forth. So he's a clever fellow, okay? And he's got access to all the information that you just gave us. And he's got to know that at very best, his economic predictions are rosy. And that in fact, if they turn out not to be as good as he thinks, we're really in trouble in terms of spending city money on anything except the Vikings Stadium.
I think Cincinnati is an example.
Yeah, Cincinnati's an example, yep. Indianapolis, St. Louis,
okay,
they're fine. So why in the world is he supporting this legacy of poverty?
So I asked the question, I basically asked your question on NPR, not quite as eloquently as you just stated it. But and the mayor said, and he said this publicly, he says, Art, I absolutely agree with you. Early childhood education for our most vulnerable kid is our #1 priority. He said it. He said it.
With a straight face?
Yeah. Well, I was actually in Arizona, so I couldn't see his face. I wasn't in the studio with him, so I did. All right. So he said, and he repeated it a few times. So his response was, however, he said, the stadium is on the plate. This is what's on the plate, he said to me. Now, I wanted to be respectful. If it was in a private conversation, I'd say, Mayor, you're mayor. Who puts these issues on the plate? Who decides what's the priorities? Why shouldn't you be saying early ed should be on the plate? So that's his answer, and I thought it was obviously a pretty weak one to say, well, he knows all this information. I know he knows this because he's a big supporter in many ways of early ed, not with resources, but in words. And that's obviously where I get frustrated, because this policy gap. It's not just your mayor, it's your governor as well. These are two, and I'm big fans of, in many ways, both the mayor and the governor, but I push them on this issue. I said, come on, guys. When is it the kids' turn? I did a piece for NPR. They have a commentary piece. This goes back 10 years. So I'm at a reception with very important people. And a dear man, John Coles, comes up to me and puts his arm around me. John Coles owned the Star Tribune, right? He's a dear man. Puts his arm around me, says, Art, boy, I really like the work you're doing on early childhood education. Absolutely agree with you. But I disagree with you on stadiums. Stadiums are critical to the success of the economy. I said, I don't really agree with that, John. But what are you suggesting? He says, look, Art, we can have both. So 10 years have gone by now, and I write this editorial, sort of a Dear John editorial. I say, John, and I had just seen John. He unfortunately passed away recently, but I just saw him. His wife, Sage, by the way, is in my corner. She gets it. So I write this editorial. Dear John, 10 years ago, you told me we can have both. So let's see, we did a hockey arena in St. Paul, we did the Timberwolves in Minneapolis, we now did the Target Center, and it looks like we're going to do $1 billion for the Vikings. Over that 10-year period, if you look at what we're spending for early childhood education and health for our most at-risk kids, adjusted for inflation, it's declined over 10 years. It's declined. So I said, when is it the kids' turn? When do we get a chance to invest in our kids? And of course, I never got a response.
I have a question and a response. I happen to really believe that dollars spent on infrastructure is a better investment than stadiums. I am an architect, and there are developers from around the country who are wanting to come and build housing in Minneapolis and build higher density cities. So to me, building the infrastructure to create the jobs is what we should be thinking about. Early education, I really philosophically agree to the early education is where it's at. How do you go about selecting the folks for these scholarships?
Oh, good question.
How do you start the cycle?
Good question.
Do the families ask for it, or do you go out and seek these opportunities?
Okay, so that's a great question, and it was a real issue for us. So we started, I told you, Mayor Coleman came to us and working with his staff, and I was pretty naive. I thought once we announced that we had scholarships, it was going to be a first come, first serve. They were going to come to the mayor's, they could sign up at the mayor's office, and well, we weren't getting many people, and we then start knocking on some doors, and who are we, and people didn't. So what we finally had to do is, with the mayor's staff, with some Ramsey County commissioners, with community leaders and faith-based leaders, we started to go around and said, look, we're really good guys. We're not taking your child away. We're giving you tools. You can choose to use them or not, by the way. We're not telling these parents they have to do anything, although every one of our parents who got a scholarship used it. And then it ended up, within a short period of time, once the word got out, we ran out of money fast. So in St. Paul, that's how we did it. With the federal money, when we go to Northside, when we go to Itasca, when we go to White Earth, we're going to do lotteries. We're just going to make it a lottery because, what's fair? And this way we'll make a lottery, but we'll also make it clear that This is just a beginning, and we're hoping to extend it so that in time every poverty child will have a scholarship.
So the long-range vision, if you get this going over time, this heals itself, right? Intervening early in education.
I'm sorry? So restate the
The
question.
long-term vision is if you intervene early and get this going over time, getting these kids prepared, over time it heals itself. So we reverse the trend that we're on. Right? That's the long range.
You sound like the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Ben Bernanke, who was an old friend of mine, made your point. He gave a speech down in Omaha on poverty, intergenerational poverty. And he said, you know, probably the best intervention we can do to end intergenerational poverty is make sure kids start kindergarten healthy and ready to learn. And I was very fortunate because he then cited my work. Up until that point, some of my Fed people were saying, you know, Rolnick, this isn't directly Federal Reserve issue. You know, we're supposed to. And so, well, once the chairman said it was important work, then I was okay. I didn't lose my job over that. But no, that is part of our research, and we're getting now, because it's a 40-year study, we're getting children of the children, and we're showing a high percentage of these kids because their parents did well and started to get themselves out of the kids. Not easy. But I argue that this is the best tool we have so far.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments today. I have one, I just want to say I went down to the state hearing, the public hearing on the stadium, and expressed my objection at the beginning of my comments because the state hearing, if you heard about the two public hearings, the first one started not with should we have a public stadium, but where should it be located. So it didn't even give us the opportunity to debate the issue you're talking about.
They never had a hearing on whether we should or not.
Exactly. So it's very frustrating. And we're a progressive state, and we never looked at the things you're talking about at all. And I was very disappointed in Mondale, Ted, on that point, because he never mentioned anything.
Excuse me, let me just stick up for his dad. If you look at his dad, his dad's got a book out that Dave Hage and Walter Mondale wrote together, but it's Mondale's autobiography. In the early 70s, he was a champion of early ed. He went up against Nixon. He had this, he lost, unfortunately, but his dad was way out in front on early ed, one of my heroes. Ted?
I'm sorry that didn't pass to his son.
Yeah.
I'm interested, just because from an economic perspective, to your point about looking at the stadium with regard to something that's I've never heard mentioned, which is the fact that the construction jobs go to men, the management jobs in stadiums go to men, all of the sports players who get the millions are men, the owners are men, and I am guessing some significant percentage of attendees are men. So the
What's your problem then?
I'm interested in the economic shift because, like you mentioned, okay, early childhood is women.
It's all women.
And so I'm interested
they marginalize us. So it's interesting. You know, I mentioned the vote. The Hennepin County vote.
You said 4 men.
4 men, and the women voted against the men 4. And if you look at these jobs, you're absolutely right. But when I go testify, first of all the men in suits are there for the Vikings. And they bring in the quarterback or they bring in the running back, whatever. Who are we going to bring in on early ed? It's viewed as a woman's field. This is a woman's issue. The jobs I'm talking about, and I can give you lots of jobs, you're right, it's mostly women in this issue. What sort of clout, what sort of political clout do we have? Zero. Look, I built you a stadium, you see it. You see the construction jobs. I invest in these kids. First of all, I live out in Plymouth. We don't see these problems. These problems with these kids are invisible until we put them in jail 20 years later. So it's not visible. Do they have any political clout? The kids don't vote. I was in Illinois making this talk, and I said, in Minnesota, the kids don't vote. I'm not sure about Chicago. And most of the parents don't vote. We don't have a coalition together that have resources. And so it is partially what you're suggesting. But I'd also say if you look at the political landscape, it's very easy to understand why research here doesn't rule. I thought, once you put the research out on the table, I'm done. Obviously, this will get funded. How naive was I?
Can I ask one more thing, because you speak on this issue, and I think something that needs to be commented on in the future is one of the things Ted Mondale and the crew on the stadium committee kept saying was the taxes of the players and others would pay for this stadium. And it was unbelievable to me that the son of Walter Mondale would be saying something like that. And I know the owners don't pay taxes here, and the players don't pay taxes here in part, but also just the fact that they get to choose where their tax dollars go, and the rest of us pay to the greater good. Yeah. So that needs to be.
Yeah, I better not comment on that. As you can tell, I also am very disappointed in the way that and how the lack of transparency. I mean, one obvious thing, and there was the fellow from Golden Valley. There's a state rep from Golden Valley. I forget his name. Winkler. He asked about the Vikings. If you're going to give a subsidy, shouldn't we see the books? Shouldn't they open up their books? And somehow we're not requiring them to open up their books. There's an awful lot going on. And by the way, this isn't new. I've been around the country on this issue. I've lost every time. The sports guys almost always win on this issue. And people tell me you don't really even want to know what's behind a lot of this as well. There's a lot of money involved here, and it's pretty tough to take these guys on, and that's all I can say. Yes, sir.
Hi, I want to thank Gary Schiff for everything he's done for the Occupy movement. And then I want to ask you about New England. I understand the Patriots owner financed his team, his new stadium himself.
You know, I don't know the details on that. I think San Francisco is one that mostly financed themselves. I heard that when I was in LA, they told me San Diego actually had a referendum and turned down, I believe they turned down the Chargers in a new stadium. I know there are examples where this has happened, where people have finally said enough already. You would think $1 billion, we would say enough already. There isn't, despite what Sid Hartman will tell you, this isn't a good investment. But my point of view on this, I mean, the Occupy movement, this is such a classic example of power politics favoring the rich. It's just classic. I don't think it ends until you get leadership in Washington that takes that David Mingy bill and passes it, so we end this. Because every once in a while, you will find a city or a state that'll stand up to these guys, but in the long run, they're going to win. They're a monopoly with an awful lot of power, a lot of economic power, and there may be some exceptions. But as I testified in Washington, if I was a betting man, I'll bet on the Vikings before I would bet on early ed in terms of getting funding. So and I think the only way I see out of this, yeah, you may win here, maybe we can finally say no to one of these teams, but they'll keep coming back, and eventually they'll get enough votes to win this thing. So I'm not that optimistic until Washington comes in and ends it at the national level. And they can do it. They can do it overnight. But it's going to take some leadership. It was interesting. I actually had Ted Kennedy interested in doing this, but it never happened.
Oh, we got time for one last question.
Thank you. I've worked in early childhood education for as long as you've been an economist. A couple of things. One is 3 years old is much too late. 90% of the kids are born ready to learn, and then we damage them. And there's some interesting research that was in yesterday's paper about stress damaging DNA. It's another,
yeah, which is very, and they're finding that. That's the most recent research, yeah.
But as I worked in the field over the years, the big problem is that the political payoff cycle is 2 to 4 years.
Right.
And the economic cycle
20,
for
30,
is
yep.
20 or 30, and nobody's around to benefit except the society at large and the kids. And
so that, remember I talked about,
and we lose every time.
The policy gap. That's one of the reasons. Let me give you two responses to that. One is, despite all criticism business community gets, businesses, Fortune 500 companies, successful businesses, they have a long run horizon. And these are the guys who came to the table, We created the Early Learning Foundation. They wrote the checks for the $20 million to what we do. This wasn't the political system. This private money came for your top corporations to do this because they do have a longer run vision. So I have found going around the country, business people get this and are willing to invest, number one. Number two, there is a movement, they're called social impact bonds. There's a fellow by the name of Robert Duggar, very influential guy in Washington. He's doing this in the state of Virginia. And what he is showing is that the kids who are going through the high quality program on scholarships in Virginia, when they get to K through 12, the number is like 18% of this population, the at-risk population, 18% need special ed. The kids who come through these high-quality programs, it's down to 2%. So he's showing significant savings there. I mean, it's enormous, especially in that state. And so what he's trying to do is show there are some short-run benefits and finance more scholarships with these social impact bonds from the savings on special ed. So there's some movement in that direction. It's one of the reasons, because it's long run, that I'm trying to get an endowment so it's fixed, permanent, and we don't have to worry about this political cycle messing it up. I think we have a shot at that. I'm actually working with Mike Cerisi on this, who thinks that the state tax money, tobacco money, and that fund really has been misused. And we're talking about maybe using that as an endowed fund. But you're right, and that's why, you know, my original frustration that I mentioned with this, what I call the policy gap, it is mostly a longer-term benefit. Okay.
I want to thank you so much for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it.